Hi everyone, welcome to today's show. My guest today is Pierre Sabak, a leading researcher, author, and symbologist whose work decodes the hidden language behind religion, mythology, and ancient texts. Known for his deep research into angels, etymology, and esoteric history, Pierre spent over 25 years uncovering how symbols, words, and archetypes have been used to disguise the presence of non-human intelligences throughout human civilization. Today we'll be exploring not just Pierre's personal journey into this research, but also his latest book, Angelic Invasion, which reveals how so-called divine messengers may in fact be transdimensional forces influencing humanity through language, ritual, and belief systems. There we go. Pierre,
Thank you
welcome.
very much. What an excellent introduction. Thank you for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. And
Okay.
your channel is fantastic. So thank you also for the work that you're doing.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's my channel is being taken an organic journey. I wasn't expecting it to go into maybe this kind of stuff, but that's just how it's unfolded, and I'm happy to follow the breadcrumbs to be here, Pierre. So, with that in mind, I'm just going to mention this book. This is Pierre's latest book, Angelic Invasion. Pierre was very kind enough to send me a copy. It's an incredible work here, so much detail in it, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, aren't we, Pierre? I hope we can, sort of go into a little bit of that if we have the time. But before we do, I mean, it would be great if we could just sort of lay the foundations a little bit. Sort of the main body of your work throughout the years, and like what got you to that point.
Um, yeah, well, there were a number of experiences that occurred in my childhood. Well, there were two defining experiences. One experience was that I saw a ghost of my teacher. Basically, I had a detention and I went upstairs to get my bag. And on the steps, I saw my teacher and I thought, oh, great, he's actually come back because he'd been away for a number of weeks. And then the next day in the assembly, it was announced that he died. And there was another experience in which, as a child, I saw a rocket in a field, and it looked like a silo, and it was in the distance, and it took off, and it sort of flew high, and at a right angle went and flew over my head. And so those two defining experiences really captivated my imagination, and I became very interested in the paranormal as a result. And I felt as a child that, obviously the ufological mystery, and this is really implicit in the name ufology because it's something which is an unidentified flying object. And I really felt that these mysteries could not be labeled or pigeonholed or understood. But I've spent now over 20 years of research into this, and I feel that we can really begin to understand this phenomenon from both from a psychological but also from a scientific perspective. So I do believe that there are answers. And I also believe that the labeling of the UFO is quite erroneous because they have been identified and they've been hidden by the priesthood, which I refer to as the disciplorati or the deceivers, which is related etymologically to the word disciple. So the disciple is an individual who deceives. And so there are different levels of initiation in which this knowledge is layered or leveled. So that was basically my introduction into this field and into the interest in this field. I did find later on as I studied, so I was my first book, The Murder of Reality. I did find that I did see other types of entities for a period when I was actually writing the book. And again, that was something which was, shall we say, somewhat unexpected. So I saw some shadow beings and some beings of light as well. So that's a very brief introduction. And I think that you'll probably find that there are many researchers who are interested in this field, and often they come into this field through personal experiences. And so I think this usually triggers an interest or an awareness of the subject.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. Funny enough, just on the UFO thing, I mean, I've seen two UFOs myself. One, I was in the car with my friend. He's a massive skeptic and, would call me a conspiracy theorist for most things. But we actually saw an orange globe like come across the screen horizontally. And then as soon as we both locked eyes on it, it went perpendicularly that way, away from us, if you
right.
like. So it went that way, and then it actually exponentially just sped off to the point where it just vanished like a kind of a, like a Star Wars sort of, hitting, top speed, or whatever. But
Excellent.
and then he was shook by that, my friend.
I mean, it actually sounds like plasma. And again, I think that there's evidence that plasma phenomenon can actually read people's minds. And so I do wonder if it was actually picking up on your thought patterns.
Yeah.
So what was the second UFO
The
which you saw?
second one, I was driving back from Stansted Airport, and I looked on the left-hand side, and in this field there was a huge drone, if you like. It was sort of, like a typical kind of, it was a triangular shaped, if you like, but the base of it was maybe hexagonal or something like that. And it was hovering off the ground, and it had sort of like red and blue lights like flashing around the bottom of it, and it was hovering in this field. And I was so like shocked that I should have pulled over and walked, but I was just kept driving for too long for it to do anything about it. And when I got home, I was actually considering driving back to see if it was still there, but I just couldn't imagine what that was. I just don't know what that could have been.
Did that look like a metallic object?
Yeah, it's like black metallic object.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So
So
I
that's,
really don't know what that is, but I would have thought other cars would have seen it as well because
yeah.
it was only about 20, 30 feet from the motorway in the grass in the field. So that was quite not
So,
terrifying, but it was quite shocking.
right. Did these experience, do you think that these experiences perhaps informed an interest in this field, in the supernatural?
Um, After that, I definitely thought there was more to this than we're meant to believe, and then it coincided with my research with David Icke. Obviously, for many people, that's a mainstream way in, and
Yeah.
it got me into the idea of not there being extraterrestrials, but there being transdimensional entities. And I was just going to ask you, Pierre,
Yeah.
so with UFOs and you mentioned entities as well, and you saw these ghost-like figures, are you more on the understanding that we kind of live in a transdimensional reality and they're transdimensional beings, or do you still take on the idea that there's, the old ET movies and extraterrestrials coming
Right.
to visit us from physical places in the solar
So
system, so to speak?
we're not just looking at actually one thing. So it's a very complicated answer. But essentially, and I wrote a book about this, it's called Holographic Culture. So holographic cultures are physical entities which have deconstructed the physical mechanics of reality. So they're interdimensional. So they understand waveform reality. And so not only do they understand waveform reality, but they've also penetrated the spiritual realm or the imaginal realm of ideas. Are these physical or spiritual entities? Well, they're all of the above. They're physical entities interfacing with a spiritual dimension. We're dealing with spiritual entities. We're dealing with a post-biological species. We're also dealing with a pre-biological species, and we could also be dealing with robots as well, and a combination of these different forms.
Okay, before I get lost in too much detail of it, I just want to make sure I'm keeping a track of it all. Um, so is it the case then that these entities, it's like we're in a holographic reality, and then in this holographic reality, there's also different dimensions within it, and then these entities operate in slightly different dimensions to ours, and they're bleeding through, are they? And they're trying to
Yes.
they're trying to sort of occupy the physical bodies of certain humans, right, the elites or something like that, to then as a conduit to
Yeah.
basically carry their purpose on Earth in the physical realm, but operating from a slightly different dimension. Have I got this kind of correct? And then, I mean, I've also,
That is definitely possible. I do make
right,
reference to that in holographic culture, the idea of an activated bloodline, and so
right,
people can be possessed by these entities,
yeah,
um, and they can materialize physically in this reality. And again, they can traverse from different star systems using this technology.
hmm,
So we are dealing here with what we would describe as star people, as extraterrestrials in a very literal sense.
yeah,
But we're also dealing with the fact that in order for them to get to A to B, not only do they have to deconstruct time and space, but they also have to deconstruct the spiritual parameters of reality.
hmm,
Because in order to understand the technology of time and space, you need to deconstruct this spiritual parameter, this other layer to reality, which is this information field. So,
okay, yeah, all right. So, we can. I would like to ask you about that information field because that's where you say there's like the language of control, right? Is that kind of
sure,
connected to that?
that's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're saying then there's a reptilian malevolent force that is controlling itself through physical bodies, through a bloodline. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And that this is symbolized as a grafted bloodline.
Yeah.
So the genetics are quite different. and again within the occult tradition. And I mean, this was made very famous through David Icke's work, this idea that there are entities which can shapeshift. And these traditions of shapeshifting entities are found certainly within the anecdotal record. They're found within the Japanese traditions. Again, I think anyway, there's a Japanese priest who refers to a princess who takes on a human form, who's a reptilian, who's a serpent. But they're found within the Persian traditions of the Dragon Kings and the line of the Chinese emperor. And again, the Jinn are said to look like serpents. And so we're seeing that there's an interconnection at an anecdotal level with entities which can take on a human form. And so whether this is literal or symbolic, again, we can discuss this, and we could argue whether this is just a form of possession or whether this is something physical in which they can actually physically manipulate the holographic level of reality. But this idea is found certainly within the anecdotal evidence.
Yeah, great. Okay, so could it be the case then that the point of communication between, like, let's say, the physical meat suit conduit of this reptilian entity that kind of works through the physical form, are they doing that through rituals and sacrifice in order to kind of create that
Yeah,
that communication? And is it like a kind of a Faustian bargain where there's certain things that are offered to these people if they, carry out their tasks, if you like?
yes. Again, I'm not really an expert on ritual magic,
Mm,
but the evidence is definitely pointing to the fact that they can actually use human vessels and possess human beings, so the human body can be used as a receptacle. And I think that there's very good evidence that this is occurring.
mm. Well, you see that with some of these politicians. I mean, they look reptilian. They don't look human, do they? Tony Blair, for one. Al
Yeah.
Gore. I mean, there's loads, but I mean,
Well,
they've got
again,
that demonic look to
it's
them.
in the occult tradition, when an entity takes over the body, then it actually affects the cellular
Yeah.
reproduction. So the physical being begins to take on some of those physical
Mm.
characteristics of the entity which is actually inhabiting the body. So that seems to be the case.
I mean, because from what I've heard from people like David Icke and other people that talk about it, is that it's a little bit like the movie Monsters Inc., where they operate from a different dimension, and then they trawl upon our human negative emotion, like fear and
Yeah.
dark negative feelings and everything else, and then it's somehow fuel for them, and they're able to then loosh that's like human loosh, right? And then they feed off that. Is that kind of your way of thinking as well?
Um, that's certainly the occultural tradition of the Jinn. And I
Mm,
do know from just sort of conversations with people who
mhm,
see entities who have schizophrenia and things like this,
mm,
that they say that they seem to feed off fear. And so when they learn to see the entities and not to be afraid of them, the entity doesn't have control over them anymore and can't interfere with them. So this is certainly found within people who have schizophrenia who can see different levels of reality. Um, but there's also an occult level in terms of sacrifice as well. So in the etymology of secret, you get the etymology of secrete, and this is related to fear. So within occult ritual, the victim will be scared, and this then leads to hormonal secretions within the blood, which are equated with this vitriol, which actually is linked into longevity. And
mm.
so this is one of the reasons why these rituals occur.
That's the ritual stuff, yeah, like the
So this, so it's
adrenochrome, yeah.
that's right. So it's different levels.
Mm, absolutely, yeah. And for
Ritual
this,
stuff goes
yeah,
back into the Bible as well,
mm,
and again, it copies a lot of what we see within cattle mutilation, where the cattle is drained of blood, and
yeah.
so in the Judaic traditions, they would drain the animal of blood, and
But
so
what do the reptilians get from that though? So I don't understand. What do these species get from that? These entities?
longevity,
The entities do.
physical
Oh, the
longevity.
physical ones do. Yeah, the
Yeah,
physical ones.
yeah.
Um, but okay, so they just want
But
to be.
at the
Yeah,
spiritual level, like
yeah,
what you were saying,
yeah.
they do seem to feed off this negative energy. And
Right.
again, I'm going into that from the psychological, from what I've heard of
Mm,
people speaking about this in terms of people who have schizophrenia who can see different levels of reality.
So there's two things going on then. There's one where they operate in a kind of slightly different dimension. They're feeding off our negative emotion, but then they also come through and they occupy the physical bodies of humans, and they obviously want to stay as long as possible in those bodies. And
Yeah.
then is it not the case then that they want to try and infiltrate all our institutions and society in order to create an environment which is kind of reptilian and negative and traumatic, because it's creating that domain that kind of looshes our energy more, and
I,
they
I
like
do
it more.
think I do think it's complicated
Right.
because it's all a matter of perspective, and I say that because in
Mm.
terms of humanity, in places, in the Ukraine and in Russia and in Gaza, it's crazy. People are killing each other, and that's just the mindset of both sides, and that's a form of insanity. It doesn't make sense, but once you get caught up in that sanity as this perverse kind of logic, um, and and so human beings are being manipulated. Um, I'm sure I was going to say
Yeah,
something
no.
else.
So I was saying that they manipulate the planet and they're trying to create a hell realm, if you like, because that's what would
Yeah.
feed
So this
from
is
us,
this is so
fall
this
from
is my
us.
point. Is that my point I was trying to make was that there are very good humans and there are very evil humans.
Mm.
And again, you can, generally speaking, most evil doesn't arise through um, bad people. I mean, sometimes it does, but the majority of evil occurs through ignorance. And so people are easily led or
Yeah,
influenced. And this is a problem when I said about the nature of consciousness, which is reflective, because people can be influenced very easily and very quickly. It's almost instantaneous. It's almost like a contagion. And I do think that epidemiological models are useful for describing consciousness and the transference of ideas. So yeah, so these entities, some of them are good and some of them are bad. And again, they're at war with themselves and there are different factions. Now, obviously, if you look at channeled material, people talk about different denominations and different factions. That's not something really which I've studied in my work. I've always kept it to etymology and symbology. And so I look at the ancient Greek etymologies for angels and the ancient Aramaic and Latin and try and understand it through the parameters of language. And I also look at it through occult ritual and symbology as well. And there is this interconnection between etymology and symbology, which is very intrinsic to understanding occult symbolism and the language of symbolism.
okay, so they're doing all that. So is this connected to what you said before about how they are in the spiritual realm of ideas and they've manipulated that, they've co-opted that, so that
I think
as we're using, sorry, so as they're using as we use language as humans, is what you're saying that we're trapping ourselves into a particular metaphysical state that they can kind of own and rule and dominate from.
yes, I think this links in
Right.
the occult tradition to the anthropic principle, this idea that when you control humanity, let's say through mind control, and particularly when you control millions of human beings,
Mm.
you're not just changing what people think, but you're actually changing the nature of the universe, the parameters of space, because
Yeah.
you're influencing the information field. And so it has universal ramifications because, as I mentioned before, information is stored within space. And so there's
Can you give some examples of that, like how they've made us use certain language patterns, words, linguistics to, yeah, affect the universe and create that? I guess we'd be then creating the reality that they want.
Uh, I think it's a really good question. Um, I'm just trying to think in terms of the parameters of languages. Yeah. So, okay. If we, so for example, when we looked at the COVID scenario,
Hmm.
we had the terminology which was being banded a lot, which was to counteract the counter argument against vaccines, and the term was anti-vax. Now, the reason why the terminology anti-vax was used, it's principally a marketing term because there's a morphological similarity between the word vax and fats. And the
Facts.
brain, fats,
Yeah.
FACTS.
Yeah.
And so the mind is drawing on a psychic an illusion or correlation with the word vax and facts. And actually, what you would find that the news readers and the news speakers were sometimes actually using the word anti-fat instead of vax,
Oh,
right?
actually, as a
But,
Freudian
but
slip or deliberately?
now they were doing this
Right.
deliberately,
Okay. Yeah.
right? Now, the reader or the listener would fill in the missing lines as anti-vax, but quickly there's a correlation or an association between being anti-fat and anti-vax, and so there's a
Yeah.
relationship there. In the same way that I'm just trying to
I
think of.
can think of one as well. So they would say things like a denier. What do they say? A climate denier is one. So they use the word denier because it's historically linked to Holocaust denial. So if
Yeah,
you deny climate change, you're a climate denier. So therefore, you're by
exactly.
association, by proxy, you're a Holocaust denier. And I mean, we don't have to talk about that because that's
No,
something else, another rabbit hole. But like
yeah, and again,
just the
the
term
word
denier, it's damning. It's
that's
saying that
correct.
you're a bad person, and it's all that kind of stuff as well, isn't there?
Yes. So imagery could be linked with injury. And so this happens all the time. And
Mm.
you also find with radio presenters as well. And I did this research, about a decade ago, but I noticed that. So, for example, the parliamentary correspondent, his surname was Wilby because it will be the repetition of will be. The the war correspondent was England, Glund, because there's a psychic inference with England.
Mm.
And again, I think no, sorry, he was Savage, and the sports correspondence was England. And so they're using names. And again, the marriage correspondent is nikah, which is the Arabic word for marriage. So they're using these
Shakespeare as
names.
well. Shakespeare was the first person to have, wasn't it not Shakespeare the first person to get the jab? Something like that. Anyway, language then, we know that they do these types of things, marketing to push certain things,
Sure.
like the thing into the arm. Um, but would you say then that it's just for the purpose of, because that was for the purpose of getting everyone to stick that thing in the arm. And then I would say there's quite, evil connotations around that and purposes for that. But is there any other ways that we knowingly or unknowingly use language that kind of benefits these people that have kind of controlled it in that way?
Well, first of all, we're in the parameters of language all the time, and the
Yeah.
mind is fixated on language,
Yeah.
and language reduces an object to a degree, to it
Mm.
simplifies ideas, and it becomes an abstraction. It separates us from the true experience because basically, once you have a memory, if you put words to the memory, you can alter the memory. And I think that this is found, for example, with orange juice. If I asked you the question, what color is orange juice? What would you say orange juice is?
Orange, yeah.
But it's not, it's cadmium yellow. So
Mm.
what you've done is you've basically, the word orange has infiltrated your
Mhm.
visual memory of what
Mhm.
orange juice is, which is cadmium yellow, and it's suffused it with a false idea. And
I'm
so
sure it's your. I'm still sure it's orange though.
you'll have to buy some orange juice, but it's a cadmium yellow. It's a bright cadmium yellow.
I guess it depends if you're having Sunny Delight or not,
Well, it
or
might
the
actually.
fresh orange juice. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It used to be cadmium yellow.
all right. So, but what's the purpose of that then? Why, like, how does that benefit anyone that we've when that
Well,
when?
I think it's the control. Again, it's the control structure. You can control people through language. You can control ideology, religious ideology, political ideology through reinforcement of words. And so there's a strong symbiosis between thought patterns and psychology and language, and the imprinting of thoughts through language.
Mhm.
So it translates to control.
Okay. So, what would be the antidote to that? I'm guessing then what would be to.
Well, it's like with subliminal symbolism,
Mm.
isn't it? The anecdote is being aware of language. So you're still going to be caught out because
Mhm.
we are we use verbal systems of communication, and this impregnates our thoughts and it contaminates the way that we view the world because we're not just like animals which just experience the world through perception, but we have this other layer or level of reality, which is through linguistics, which shapes our world and it shapes our parameters of reality. And I guess also there's a philosophical question in terms of whether there are linguistic structures or linguistic systems which can make human beings think more efficiently. and make us remember more efficiently. And I do think that that actually then interconnects with subjects like phonetics or and the actual sound or the resonance of the language. And so I think that certain types of languages uh, put people into different, shall we say, states, or it
Right.
utilizes different brain waves. And so I
Yeah.
do think that some languages are, shall we say, can facilitate memory patterns better. So
Oh,
individuals
right.
remember.
So, okay, so just through language itself, you can actually induce certain emotional,
You can
energetic states.
you can induce brainwave, different
Right.
brainwave.
Okay. It's maybe why it's called letters because they allow in different,
Correct.
resonance or yeah.
That's right. So just to give an example, in English we have we have a phenomenon of stuttering, but this does not occur
Mm.
within Chinese.
All right.
Um, and now a stutterer will be able to sing. So when they sing, they
Yeah.
don't stutter.
Gareth Gates. Yeah, was the
Yeah, that's
example.
right.
Yeah.
And this is to do with the change within the brainwave. And we do find that there's also a correlation in terms of memory. So in cases of agnosia, where a person may have a difficulty of, let's say, remembering how to use a computer, if they want to remember, they will sing in order to induce
Singing,
this.
singing comes from the diaphragm. That's why, and talking comes
Yeah,
from the mouth. That's the
yeah.
reason, isn't it?
I think it is, but it's also linked into brainwave activity.
Okay.
And so
Mm.
this also bears interesting questions because, for example, Chinese people don't stutter. And so their tonal inflections within the language is, shall we say, more musical. And that means that probably in terms of, because in abduction cases, in UFO cases, there are many individuals who are affected by these electromagnetic fields and they suffer from agnosia, or this loss of recognition of objects, and amnesia. And I am wondering whether in cases of Chinese abduction, for example, because they have this immunity to agnosia because their language is more tonal, whether their memory of these types of abductions would be more accurate. And so I think that that would be very useful in terms
That's
of,
interesting.
yeah, just in terms of looking at Chinese cases of paranormal phenomena and trying to deconstruct those.
Because
I think that they
on
could
that
be.
note, though, just to jump in, is that if you look at the different language sets, like the alphabet sets across the world, as you change the characters, you actually change the physical characters, don't you? So if you change, so everyone that's using the English, Latin, whatever, like character set for the alphabet, have a similar character, physical, like the way that their persona, their temperament, right? But when
Yes.
you change the character set, you actually notice it's a completely different character set.
That's very good. It's a very good observation. It's not one that I'd observed myself, but it makes complete sense both from the occult tradition and
Mm,
also just in terms of sense. Yes, because the speaking and the language
mm,
informs culture, which informs a personality. And
mm.
so the different character sets, as you quite rightly point out, would be indicative of different characters. And again, in terms of language, this also has interesting implications, not in terms of just learning and in terms of what are more efficient systems of language, because I believe that grammar introduces entropy into the system, which is a loss of information. And so certain types of languages are inefficient at storing data or information. And so, there are interesting arguments in terms of, do certain languages facilitate different brainwave states which are linked in, let's say, to learning and an advancement, and
Yeah.
also maybe into more warlike mentalities,
Mm,
and more aggressive manifestations of human consciousness. And so I
mm.
do think that there's a correlation there with the phonetics of words and how that is imprinting on the brainwaves. I think that's something which needs to be studied within linguistics. Uh,
I'm wondering whether does grammar come from grimoire? Because grimoire's like about magic textbook, isn't it? Like book of
Yes,
spells.
there's an indirect correlation etymologically, which is equated with glamour, which is a
Mm.
stupor or to place an enchantment on a person.
Yeah.
And again, as we said, grammar is linked into spelling, which is a spell, a magical spell.
Magical spells. And
Yeah,
then I've also noticed that you have a lot of words that are linked to sound. So it's suggesting that it's a referent of the reality that it's partly made up of sound vibration. So you have the universe, the one verse. If
correct.
if I'm measuring this room, it would be the volume of this room. I write on a note. In football, they when you get it in the net, it's a score. You know, you score. You play on a pitch in football, of
Yeah,
course. You know,
yeah,
when you die, you decompose. My body's made up of organs. I would say conduct yourself better. You know,
yeah.
so it's all kind of referring to sound. And then I also noticed that there's words that refer to light as well. So the word for if I the past tense of seeing something is seen.
Which
Is
is a
also it's
landscape.
also a scene as a landscape. And then
Right.
what was the other one? Sight is also
Height.
SITE and SIGHT.
It's location as
Yeah,
well.
so there's it
Yeah,
thinks
and
to me there's crossovers there between. So they've got sound, they've got light, and we're using these knowingly or unknowingly throughout our day, which kind of suggests to me that it's bubbling up, referring to
yeah,
something.
I think that's really interesting because I've just been writing about those exact correlations which you've formed
Mm,
very recently in the last couple of weeks, and so that's synchronicity.
okay.
Um,
Yeah,
so the
lovely.
observations, yeah, I've made the same observations. So in English, we have a correlation with, well, there are, to see is see. And
Mm,
so you have different, shall we say, parameters of these word fields, which I refer to as syntenic strings.
mm,
And so sea is polymorphic of sea, which is a body or an ocean of water.
mm,
You've got lake, which is related to look. Watcher is which is related to water, right? And so when you look at sight, which is traditionally traced from the etymology of sea,
mm.
sight is equated with height, which suggests a different etymology. That would be, for example, analogous to peak, which is to look, but peak as in a high peak or sight and height.
Oh wow, yeah.
So, so the etymology traditionally is related to sea, but sight would indicate a different etymology, which has been lost.
Oh, it's
Uh,
like a deviation from sight into height and
it's
kind of
about,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's correct.
That
Pier as well, because if you pier, you're on a pier which is overlooking water. So
oh wow, yeah, okay, that's interesting.
So
Yes.
these syntenic strings are universal, and I refer to these as polysyntenic strings. And so you see these word uniformities, which are these parallel thought formations
Mm,
encoded in multiple languages. So if I gave you an example, Theos God and Theoros a watcher is equated in English with God and Gad, which is the old root to watch. But we see that there's also a correspondence in the Hebrew as well. El God and which is a watcher, or Yahweh and Yara, which is to see or to watch. And so these wordplays are polyglottal. They work in multiple tongues. And so there is this
mm.
universal representation within language. Leibniz described this as the characteristic universalis, which is this universal structure inherent within language and found within these polysyntenic strings. And so I
Mm.
do believe it is possible to make a universal translator, which is mathematically accurate. So at the moment, we're translating language approximately using etymology, but a more accurate way of translating language would be through these syntenic strings, which I highlight in my book, Angelic Invasion.
Amazing, amazing. So that would you say then that there's certain elements on this earthly realm which are organic and bubble up organically, but then you're saying that there's also this overlay. It
Correct.
could be with language and the institutions that we
Yeah.
see, and then when we participate in that, we kind of get stuck into that metaphysical frame, and then
Yes.
we take on that the resonance of that as well, which is maybe
Absolutely.
pulling itself into that. I don't know what the wording for that would be, but
Yeah.
that sort of benefit to that
Yeah.
to those entities or whatever.
That's right, because the soul is an information pattern,
Right.
and the information pattern is the logos, which is the word or the
Hmm.
information field, the simulation. And so language does have this imprint on the soul. And so how we materialize in the physical realm is equated to language. And so the universe is this grammatical system. I refer to it as the grammatrix. So it has linguistic properties which can be understood through grammatical systems and can be deconstructed in the same way that the Pythagoreans deconstructed the universe through numerals. But really, language and numbers are one and the same. They are a communication device which is intrinsically linked into the codification of physical life, of the universe, of the materialization of living form.
And so when, let's say that you use certain language patterns, certain words, you're in certain buildings, or you're just operating under, like the kind of the law of the country, not common law, not law of the land, but
Okay.
maybe kind of the straw man stuff, like the acts and stuff like that, the
Yeah.
statutes. that could be it could be like I don't know what you'd call it, like satanic or reptilian overlay.
Well,
And then when you engage with it, maybe you are somehow giving your power away.
yeah, I mean, obviously you are to a degree. In terms of the statutes, stratia is the old word for the angelic host, and so the statutes are laid out by the angelic lineage or of lordship. So
Mm.
yes, there's an energetic component to language, which is metaphysical and interlinks with the physical realization of this reality, which we can describe in terms of metaphors, of computer metaphors or computer programs, which I think are useful for understanding the physical realm of ideas. This, like logos, or this information pattern, the word, the
Yeah.
impregnation of the word into physical form, in the same way that genetic information is a language code or a language pattern.
Genetic information, what DNA?
DNA, absolutely.
Right. Okay. Oh, so on a different level, it's just
Yeah,
maybe computer coding.
at one level.
Wow. Okay. So effectively, I'm going to put all these different elements together, and I'm going to see
Yeah,
what I come up with here. So the idea is that we could potentially be living in like a supercomputer,
potential.
um, and potentially, and then, and we're saying that it could be a multiverse of other supercomputers, or we're not sure about that. You know,
I'd say that's a probability.
that's a probability. And then within this, let's just take our supercomputer. We don't have to worry about the others
Yeah.
for now. We're saying that
I'm
we,
not. By the way, I'm not saying it is a
yeah.
supercomputer, but I'm
Oh,
saying that
okay.
it's. I'm certainly
Oh,
saying
right.
it's a useful metaphor for understanding the universe.
Right.
But
Okay.
again, we also need to be open to the possibility that it could be a computer of some sort or some type of simulation.
Or let's just say simulation, just to keep it kind of a bit more
Okay,
simple.
I'm happy with the word simulation.
Yeah. And then, so then within this realm, we got us humans, and let's just say that we are of one bloodline. I don't know what our origins are. I don't know if you have any insight into that. But then you somehow have other entities wanting to come and join the party, but they don't necessarily want to live amongst us, um, and show their face. They kind of want to operate slightly outside of visible light, and they want to it's like a metaphysical food chain, like where you have we
Yeah,
see that where the bird eats the spider, and then the fox eats the bird, and so on and so on. It's like a metaphysical version of that energetically,
yeah,
where just outside of visible light may be an entity that's actually feeding off us, not killing us, but feeding upon us.
yeah.
But they don't show their face. So why do you think that we're in this simulation whereby there's this all these entities all kind of consuming each other and trying to vie for dominance then?
Uh, well, I think that the purpose of life is life, isn't it? I
Mm.
mean, this is the purpose of experience is materialization. It is, the purpose of life seems to be life.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's an interesting question.
Yeah, but there's no real answer to it, is there? We're still working it
It's a
all out.
different.
Yeah, it's
It's
difficult.
the
Yeah,
meaning of life. The meaning of
I
life.
guess so. I guess so. But it's also like if we bring it back more, I guess to the sort of more surface level, then like the UFOs and these entities, they are emerging and they are kind of showing themselves, but at the same time not fully.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
uh, yeah,
I mean, remember, you have a soul pattern,
yeah.
and if we follow the occult tradition, the soul pattern is materialized in multiple incarnations in the future and in the past. And
Mm,
so you're looking at this from a physical perspective because
mm,
you don't have a recollection or memory of your soul pattern. And so you're looking at this in a very, shall we say, binary way
yes.
of spirit and flesh. I mean, the Greek word sark, flesh, is equated with psyche, which is the spirit, because the two are seen to be interconnected and synonymous. And I think we kind of need a more fluid idea about the physics of the flesh and the spirit, much like, shall we say, waveform duality, in which there is this fluidity between, shall we say, the quantum foam and the realization of particles in physical matter through the projection of the waveform. So, um, so it's very fluid, and they understand this, and so they are materializing physical, and they have the capacity to physically materialize, to exist physically, and to exist for long periods of time as well. but they also can dematerialize. And then we're dealing with this second component, which is this organic realm of ideas, which seems to be equated with this intelligent life form, which is plasma, which is this aggregate or this super intelligence. And so the two are interfacing together, but it is very fluid.
They work together, do they? That's the
Um, I would say that they're interfacing.
interface. So is the plasma its own consciousness, its own entity, or is it just a kind of
It's
a?
a, yes, it's a living creature.
So is there not some kind of conflict or competition between the plasma and consciousness and the kind of reptilian entities?
Okay, the plasma is far more intelligent than the reptilian entities.
Right.
It's the
Okay.
most
Yeah.
intelligent thing in the universe.
Right.
So yeah, it's not like we
Mm.
could destroy the plasma. With it is just beyond. It's almost godlike in its intelligence. And again, this is why I think that the Jinn were worshipped in the Mediterranean and in the Middle East. And also, we've got the traditions of the fairies and the seers. So the seers could actually see the fairies, and there's this connection between psychics and the ability to see not just spirits but Jinn, which are these plasmic entities.
Yeah.
So
I just interviewed a guest who sees fairies and
okay,
sees that realm.
yeah,
And she says Fae. She calls it FAE, I think.
okay.
But
Well,
but oh, but
we're
yeah,
seeing what they want us to see, because
yeah.
remember that we're penetrating the imaginal realm of ideas, and so.
What do you
For
mean by that? Sorry, what do you mean we're
Okay,
penetrating the
so for
imaginal realm of
example,
ideas?
if I was communicating with a plasma,
Yeah,
and the plasma wanted to show me a materialization of an alien life form,
yeah.
and it could simulate the intelligence of that alien life form accurately, because
Hmm.
it would have that information pattern within the plasma realm,
Hmm.
right? But it might be simulating an entity which had died 1 billion years ago. Do you understand that? And so
Hmm.
Uh, so if you see a fairy or a jinn or a satyr,
Yeah.
you know, these are all different materializations in terms of this type of projection.
How would they interact with us?
So they're using plasma to communicate as a direct medium telepathically.
Oh, so people are actually picking up on certain things
That's
telepathically.
right.
Well,
Yeah.
anyone or just the ones that are tuned into it? Like,
Well, I'm almost looking at plasma as almost like an individual could be infected. So, for
yeah,
example, if you went to a particular area which is
yeah,
haunted
yeah.
and there's plasma, I don't know how this plasma gets into the body, but once it's in the body, it can replicate itself and then it can communicate. And
Right.
that's
That's what the woman said. She says in the haunted house there was a wall of plasma coming towards her.
okay.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
that would make sense. And that fits in with my research.
Does
And
it?
so,
Mm.
yeah, as I said, it's very complicated. The alien dialectic is really the subpneumatic collective. So some on his body, somatic spirit. So this is the body spirit dialectic, the dichotomy between the physical and the spiritual, and how the two actually interface within our reality. And I think that this is important because it is interfacing at our level of reality and it's communicating with humanity.
I mean, I've heard theories that the moon's just plasma.
I stated to various scientists that the moon is not a piece of rock, but it is a plasma phenomenon, a cosmic plasma.
Just quick fire then. What would you say the sun and the moon are?
Um, well, I'm a literalist. I think that basically the sun and the moon are these planetary bodies. I know that you've got flat people who believe in the flat Earth
Mm.
have different interpretations. I do think that the symbology of the flat Earth is actually connected in terms of the four corners of the Earth is equated to how they actually make out legal contracts and is actually linked into contractual law and the symbology behind that. And I do actually think that there's a lot of occult symbology within the flat Earth, but it's encoding different levels of reality and complex mathematics. So there are different levels of this. My understanding is that we're on a physical planet. And I say this just because my son is a lucid dreamer and he is
Same.
able to project his consciousness. And he said that he's seen the planet. He's flown into the sky and viewed the Earth thousands of miles away. and that it is actually a physical round planet. And I think also, if you look at the biblical tradition as well, I think it's in the book of Isaiah, the scribes describe that God moved around the circle of the earth. And okay, you could argue that the circle of the earth could be flat, but I think that they were understanding that this was a planetary body, which kind of makes sense in terms of what we're observing. Now, I obviously understand that what happens is, because we've been fed so many lies, that people become very cynical. And I do think it's good to be skeptical and to question everything. But I do wonder whether things like the flat earth and these ideas is a type of disinformation, which is used to try and undermine the alternative media.
I often question that as well. Like the thing that I thought was the closest thing to what I was visualizing. I saw an image the other day. I just want to flash this up to you because I think it's both flat and curved, because I think there's some kind of what's that shape? It's like a donut shape that comes out. There's a name for that. Sorry, it's like a torus field. Let me see if I can just quickly find it here.
Yeah, well, there are different dimensions, definitely.
So I think this is probably the closest thing to what we're on. So it's both flat and it's a torus field, so it's round.
Okay.
And I think that the eye, so the North Pole is probably hiding some stuff there, and the South Pole it's probably the ring where they protect, because there's probably land outside of.
I think that's interesting because the Greek idea, hypostasis, reality, literally means sediment. This idea that reality is composed molecularly. But the idea is that reality is stratified, and so there are different levels or multiple levels of reality. And I do think that, and this is typical of propaganda, in terms of that they take the truth and they hide the truth with lies. And so and I think that this was the same with the Greeks as well, that, the Ptolemy's idea of the flat earth, basically the knowledge that the earth was round is military knowledge. It has military applications. And so they took this projection, but they also had numbers which actually encoded accurately so that they could survey and so that they could draw maps, and so they knew where they were on the surface of the earth. And so we're seeing that there is an advanced numerical system which is linked into surveying physically the physical earth. I do wonder if there's also interdimensional numbers as well in this occulted knowledge, which links into the symbology of the flat earth. I have not looked at, I've not really looked into this in detail, but it would not surprise me if there's a deep symbology behind the numbers found within flat earth, which reveals a deeper truth, which is actually encoding the real truth behind the flat earth.
Oh, right. That's interesting. What you mean within the movement itself, like
just within the mathematics would encode different dimensions, which could be represented, for example, as musical notes or different octaves, and these would have astrotheological connotations and possibly linking to geometrical coordinations. So different, if you like, a different musical scale, or a musical scale could be used to represent geometrically location through musical notes.
Yeah, but so how's that connect to the flat earth stuff?
Well, I'm just saying that it's possibly interconnected with multiple dimensions. But as I said before, I'm speculating here because this is not a field. I'm out of my depth here. I'm not really talking about a level of knowledge which I understand.
Yeah, that's all right.
I'm speculating.
That's fine. Yeah, it's good to just have a freestyle of certain things. Just let the conversation go loose. No, it's great stuff. I mean, I could talk to you all day. It's fascinating. I'm just, it's great to, and when we've gone, I didn't even notice the time, but we've been going on for about 2 hours or so. So really appreciate your time. Let's just now also mention the book again, okay? Because
really?
I want to help you out with this and plug this a little bit more. You kindly sent me this, Angelic Invasion. Yeah, without going too much in, but maybe keep it like a kind of a 30 seconds or something, just to kind of give a trailer for it,
Okay.
What is this? Because I know you touched upon it earlier, but just kind of give another, synopsis of it.
Synopsis. Okay. It's basically looking at modern alien abduction, and it's looking at language models in order to deconstruct amnesic memories. And so I'm looking at language and I'm looking at memory and the way in which language and memory interconnect in order to inform behavior. But I'm also arguing that we can use language models to deconstruct amnesic memories, and in cases of agnosia, where the person has lost the ability to recognize physical objects, which often occur within ufological cases, which are interconnected to these electromagnetic fields, which seem to affect the nervous system. And so,
how would you do that? So how would you go into
so
someone
this
with
is
amnesia
basically
then?
okay.
Like,
So this is basically through the use of synthetic strings, and I gave a
mm,
simple example earlier on in
yeah.
the Paul Sinclair case, where he said that he saw cows' faces, but the faces of the cows are related etymologically to cower, to be afraid and coward, and so this was indicative of fear. Again, you've got in the Oram case, he said that he saw a large 2-foot owl. Again, the word owl is morphologically reminiscent or similar to howl, which is to scream out in pain. And he makes this reference to blood as well in his memory.
But
So
are these his? Are they a projection of his mind, or are these like screen memories where they're like
yeah,
implanted memories?
so these are implants. So
Right.
this is the transition of memory using words, which is used to transition memory. So that's the premise of the book: is that memories can be altered through language. And so there's a fundamental connection between these synthetic strings and the back engineering of memory. And so we can successfully, shall we say, reorganize and restructure memory in order to deconstruct some ufological cases, particularly cases which have high strangeness, which are very difficult to unpack and are very difficult to understand.
So they're actually seeing. So correct me if I'm wrong. They're not actually seeing objectively a cow. It's a symbol which actually has a metaphorical origin, which actually, when you can reverse engineer it, can actually bring back the person's true memory.
At a simplistic level, yes, but remember,
Okay.
telepathy is a two-way interface, so there's a transfer of information. So the entity is extracting information from the mind
Yeah.
and is then relaying the information back. So there is this two-way
Two
process.
way. But it's not consensual though, is it?
No, it's not consensual. No, so it's
So
a
what?
form. It is a form of deception.
So what do they want from those abductees then?
Well, again, we have very good anecdotal records going all the way back to the Nubagina, the offspring of the clouds. And this offspring is linked into Nubia, which is to marry. So there does seem to be a genetic harvesting of humans, which is found both in the Latin traditions of the nymphs, nymph, which is to sleep, and Nubia, which is to marry, and the Nubagina, which are the offspring of the clouds. So there's this genetic component, but there's and this fits very well with the ufological tradition in terms of the genetic engineering. As I said, that they are planters of word, and the angel Zar, an angel alien, is equated with Sira boat, and Zaria, which is to sow, or to with the etymologies of seed in the Arabic.
So hang on, what was I just asked you? Yeah,
So
what do
that
they want? So yeah, so just to just clarify again, what is
well,
it they want from the
my
abductee?
speculation, and
Yeah.
this is contained in my book Holographic
Mm.
Culture, is that they're using cycles of evolution and emergent systems in order to remain at the top of the pecking order. So
Hmm.
they're exploiting thought patterns in
Yeah, but
order to.
why are they just targeting one person then?
Well, there could be a genetic component. Again, you know,
Mm.
and what we're doing is it's
Mm.
almost, as a symbologist, and I'm looking at words in order to try and deconstruct language.
Mm.
I'm almost like a detective who's at the scene of the crime. The crime has already occurred, and so I'm trying to piece together the fragments that we have.
That's all right. Yeah. So what are you what's your conclusion then, or
Well,
your
my intuition is
mm.
that they're genetically engineering humans, but there's also a spiritual component as well. And so they're interfacing with humanity at a spiritual level, and they're also possessing people
No,
through.
that's the general thing, right? I'm talking about the abductees. Now, let's say, because I've interviewed an abductee,
Yeah.
and well, she believes she was anyway. I think it could just be like CIA, black ops stuff. I'm not sure about that, but I'm just wondering why they would target her, who lives on a tiny little house, middle of nowhere in Arizona, in the
Yeah.
in the desert, wherever it is, in Nevada. And I'm just wondering why are they targeting an old lady, abducting her?
Well, again, even with the traditions of the fairies,
Mm.
it was basically said that the fairies would target certain bloodlines, and this
Right.
is also found within aliens as well.
Uh-huh.
So whether and there's probably a genetic compatibility, and in terms of telepathy as well, there seems to be compatibility. So I do think that there could be certain people they can communicate um, telepathically, and so that could be a genetic component. And again, if they can communicate telepathically, then they can control the person. So I do think that there's different levels to this, and it seems to be connected to sort of this symbiosis of different bloodlines, which is represented in the earlier traditions with the grafting of different bloodlines. Um, but again, this is very ancient. It goes into the ancient world, and it goes into human evolution, goes into human genetics. It's a very complicated question. It's not an easy question, and I think if you asked many ufologists, they would all give different answers.
Mm.
And clearly, we only have fragments of what is occurring within this phenomenon. It is a very complex question, and so we're only picking up piecemeal traces of what is really occurring. But at some level, there's a genetic component to this, and this is certainly documented within the historical record.
Yeah.
I think at another level, there's a spiritual component, and it would link into the incarnation of souls as well. And again,
Mm.
this is a very occulted tradition.
Mm. Okay. So, if you're not abducted by, a UFO or any kind of entity, though,
You see, I
it's
do wonder, and
mm,
I do wonder if these entities are interfacing with humanity more than what we think. So
yeah.
we tend to think, oh, an abductee is really, really rare. And possibly we would think that even out of all the abductees, maybe many are just dreams and delusions, and it's just the 1% which are really abductees. But there is another argument to this, and we could actually argue, if you ask most people, I would say that at least 1 in 4, and it could be more, 1 in 3, have had supernatural experiences, and quite possibly we might even be looking at 50%, because a lot of rational people will say, yeah, something strange happened, but it was just an hallucination, and so they wouldn't necessarily term it or voice it.
Wow. Okay. So you're saying that even things that we consider pretty normal could actually be in their own way an abduction, because like deja vu, for instance, they could do something with you, bring you back and like reset you like you're playing Sonic the Hedgehog and starting the game all over again from the beginning of the game.
Exactly,
And then
because
that
you're,
is that
you're
kind of thing,
dealing with
right?
these temporal switches, so
Yeah.
they have control over time, so they could theoretically
Mm.
take you and put you back before you arrived.
Yeah, even just things like we spoke about before we hit record about, you walk into a room and you like forgot why you walked into the room.
Yeah,
Um, it's almost like a
you
reset,
reset.
isn't it?
Yeah,
So who's to say that that isn't also some kind of meddling?
yeah. I mean, you know, I've moved on my position on this.
Yeah.
In the past, I used to think that this was very rare.
Mm.
I'm beginning to think that this is actually very, very common, and most people just shrug it off as wasn't that strange and don't really think about it anymore. And so I think that this is actually quite common. So yeah, it's a big body of work.
Yeah.
It's taken many years to deconstruct and to understand. But
Mm.
as I said before, once upon a time, I felt that basically UFOs were unidentified and that it was not possible to deconstruct this. But I do believe that we are on the verge of understanding what this phenomenon is. And I do think that things such as AI, and that's something we could leave for a later
Yeah.
conversation. But there is certainly the possibility that there's a non-temporal AI which could be infecting the environment and is also communicating with people, possibly via plasma, but also could be separate and could be somehow interrelated with plasma.
I'm
So
going to
this
make
is,
a note of that. Yeah, I think
yeah,
we should talk about that next one. Yeah,
I
because
think so.
I actually think that during the whole clown vid, it felt very AI controlled.
Yes,
Because I'll tell you why. Because everything was very the distancing, the social
yeah,
distancing. It all felt very like insectoid. Like ants
yes,
marching. It
yeah,
felt a lot like that, and it
yeah,
felt regimented and like it had to be scripted out with AI or something. But I don't know. It
yeah.
could be a consciousness. I don't know. That's something we can definitely talk about. I'd love
Yeah,
to talk.
I think so, and I think also I do think that that would be more difficult now because I think people have what they did is that the governments got the peoples of the world to fall in line and to fall in lockstep. And people have now reflected upon that. And they've, I'm not saying everybody has, but I'm saying more numbers of people have reflected upon that. And so I think that that would be much more difficult to implement a second time.
Yeah, I mean, you even sees things like for outdoors they had people in pens. I don't know if you saw this,
Yes.
like festivals and stuff, and people didn't even question it.
No, no.
It was quite actually terrifying to see this sort of insanity unfold. But then you're watching it like a kind of what do they call it, the like lemmings falling off a cliff or something, and not being able to say anything because you look the madman. But that's
Yeah.
what I mean about that AI, that kind of people literally putting themselves in pens
Yes.
outdoors.
Yeah, this is groupthink again, isn't it? And
Yeah.
it's behind all of the atrocities. And again, I try not to get too judgmental because it is based upon ignorance, and many people are good. But when humanity loses its way, it's usually due to manipulation and or ignorance.
Yeah.
And so I just think we've got to try and be compassionate and have sympathy for people, basically, and not to judge. But I agree with you completely. The problems within the world are basically through groupthink, and this is what we were talking about earlier about the reflective nature of consciousness. So that's
still lots to talk about, basically, and
there's a lot
go
to
into.
talk about.
I love it. We're only scraping the surface of some of this.
We've only scraped the surface.
I know there's so many rabbit holes we could go down.